Thank you and welcome to the show for today. You're watching Perspectives and I am host Alana McLaughlin. This morning on the show I have Melissa Alvarez of the Tennessee Hispanic Action Network here to discuss her background, her education, the work that she has had in the local Tennessee community, and the impact that she and her network seek to leave on the local community. Thank you, Melissa, for joining me this morning.
Thank you so much for having me.
And to just jump right into this story, to this interview, I'd like to talk about baby Melissa years.
Yeah.
Kind of set up for me your early childhood, what that looked like, what kind of home looked like, and we'll go from there.
Yeah. So I come from South Florida. I was born in West Palm Beach, Florida. It's a very Hispanic community. I don't want to say homogenous because it's like Caribbean and South American, and so it's very diverse, right? So I'm Cuban, and I grew up around just such colorful, wonderful people. But yeah, it was different. We experienced things that we just accepted. So growing up, there was kind of gun violence around, and you just accepted it. I think my earliest memories of gun violence was my grandmother's house was affected by a drive-by shooting, and it almost took the life of, my uncle. And very young, I seen the bullet holes in the wall and already feeling that experience of, being scared of what, when you're in a very safe place like your grandmother's house, knowing that there's something scary that can happen. And just growing up around gun violence and hearing this and that happening with guns and tragedies, and you just accept it. And then when we got to about middle school, there were two school shootings that occurred in my hometown, and resources weren't thrown. People didn't come out and advocate for school safety or for, gun safety. And then these stories just started to become more and more common. And it was more like, watch your back, be careful. And then some people would go buy guns to protect themselves from guns. And it just became kind of overwhelming. I think you just sometimes accept it and don't realize that that stuff does affect children,
Right.
So an interesting kind of story about that after kind of one of the school shootings, if I could just mention, was that one of the school shootings that they had the kids come right back to school right after a kid came and pulled out a gun and took the life of a teacher. So there weren't either like the perspective of a student affected by the school shootings either weren't taken into consideration. And again, coming from a very diverse community, it just seemed like that's the way it is, and that's acceptable, right?
Right.
So I went to school, I went to high school. I did not finish high school. It was, it's kind of a rough area. And I ended up getting a GED. And then, so I had this perspective that a lot of people find sometimes unpopular, whereas if you don't finish high school, that you can't move forward. I got a GED. I went to college. I was able to go to a university. I went to grad school. I got a master's degree. I was accepted into a PhD program. I didn't get a fellowship stipend, so I didn't do it. So there is movement for growth. So there are systems in place to be able to offer those resources for students. So I studied social work because I wanted to see how to make an impact in community and social change. And in grad school, I focused on policy and research. And I got involved in my community, and I really felt really connected to my community that way.
And Melissa, in our second segment, we're going to pick back up on your work within the community.
Okay.
I want to specifically talk about some of the work you had in Syracuse, New York.
Okay.
Ultimately kind of building up to the work you now do in Tennessee. And I encourage our viewers to tune into the second segment of Perspectives, where Melissa and I will return to discuss the Tennessee Hispanic Action Network. Of the show for today. For viewers just tuning in, I am host Alana McLaughlin. You are watching Perspectives. This morning on the show, I am discussing the Tennessee Hispanic Action Network with Melissa Alvarez, founder, who is discussing her background, her education, the work that she's done all across the country, and ultimately the current work that she is doing here in Tennessee for local Hispanic communities. In our first segment, Melissa talked about her early upbringing and childhood in West Palm Beach, Florida. We talked about some of the experiences that shaped her in Florida, and ultimately now we're talking about that later adolescence leading up to her move to Tennessee and the work that she does here. And we're just hopping right back into Melissa's awesome story. We're coming right back. I want to talk specifically about your transition to Syracuse and some of the experiences you had there and how that kind of shaped you.
Yeah. So from Syracuse, actually from Florida, I first moved to a little town right outside of Boston. And this was like my first time out of a very Hispanic community. And I was really a fish out of water. And my first job interview that I went to, it was such a great interview. Me and the owner of this job hit it off. And she said, I can give you this job, but I need proof that you're not undocumented. I need proof of your citizenship. So, she was like, I really love that you don't have an accent, because I need somebody that can speak Spanish to my clients that speak Spanish, but I don't want people to know and turn you off and lose clients. But I needed money, so I was like, I showed birth certificate, I did everything that I did, so I got the job because I needed money. But that right there, and then hearing how people spoke about Hispanics, how we were sort of like cast as like such bad people. And I'm coming from a community where I'm like, there's so many Hispanics, nobody thinks that. We are so much fun. We're great. So before I moved to Syracuse, I specifically looked for a job that was helping the Hispanic community. And I found the Spanish Action League of Onondaga County. And before I moved there, I emailed the executive director's assistant. His name was Jesus. And I said, I love what your organization's doing. I want a job. And Jesus is like, you didn't even live here. He ignores me. I sent him another email. Jesus, I really like this organization. I'm moving there. I want to get a job. And he was like, okay, so talk to me when you get here, lady. So I get there. The day that I moved to Syracuse, I'm not even done unpacking. I find my box of nice clothes. I put on a nice outfit. I walk over to the Spanish Action League. And I knock on the door and I say, can I speak to Jesus? And this guy comes out and he's like, oh, you're the one that's been emailing me. So they give me this job. And I didn't realize the community impact that we were going to have at the time. Yeah. This job helped shape who I was. One of the biggest influences of my life, between the people that I worked with, the mission of the organization, and the outreach and the actual impacts of the organization. So it was the only Hispanic organization that offered human services to the entire county and the surrounding 7 counties. And the next one wasn't all the way out to Rochester, and they're doing great stuff too out there in Rochester. But I started in housing, and I started doing a lot of more community work outside of that. I had an amazing supervisor, and he would push me outside of my comfort zone. He'd go, today your job is to just be part of the community, right? Just do what the community does. And so housing took a different thing, because once you realize what affects housing, you realize, which is also part of my social work training, is the person and environment type of perspective. So many things affect somebody's ability to get housing. So one of the things that we did was I worked with a grassroots, I wouldn't even say organization, just some community leaders at the state of New York, and we worked on a proposal which was accepted and finalized as part of the New York State. It's now still part of New York State budget. Is an additional $360 million is annually added to that budget in the way that people get heating electric assistance for the cold months and everything. So that impacted over 500,000 families that had this ability to get extra help during the winter months because our heating bills are so expensive. I mean, they're expensive here. Imagine there. And so then there was a lot of community organizing at the time. Then we had a new administration. Then Trump became the president, and with that administration cut a lot of our funding off. We lost a lot of funding. And so it was playing like a lot of defense to try to save our funding and save our programs that affect communities. So I became this community girl through and through. I didn't want to do anything else but community work. I loved doing community work. So it looked like, my housing looked like helping people get social services, helping people find a safe place to live. So that's something that we advocate for still. My organization also advocates for is that gun violence prevention is a housing, is an employment problem. Like we can help prevent these things when we help provide services, so supportive services. These like wraparound services are to be able to help people in change. So we started doing community events. We did coalition building. We worked together and we're able to impact so many people's lives. We're able to get people into homeownership that were just a few years before, living in shelters. There was so much work that we did, and everything kind of bled in between each other from departments. So arts were also part of it, like keeping kids in after-school programs and incorporating the arts into after-school programs to keep kids off of the streets. Mitigation type of services, right? Making sure people didn't just have a house and didn't have a roof over their head, but making sure that they had safe, clean, and affordable living. So it was beautiful. It was one of the best experiences of my life, and I wouldn't change that for anything. In fact, I think everybody should do some community work like that. We worked in schools. There's so much bleed over. It was just, I don't know how to get the message through across. It was so community based.
And to kind of wrap this second segment, I want to talk about some of the obstacles. We know gun violence, but tell me some of the other obstacles that those New York families that you kind of worked with were experiencing.
Yeah, lots of obstacles. One, funding. Funding was always, we got residual funding, which meant that everything went to bigger, more exposed problems. So these issues, when we talk about statistics, disproportionately affect the Latino community, but don't always get that funding there. But then it's also like out of like foreign investors, people, which Nashville also experiences a lot of foreign investors. They're not people that are able to understand what's wrong. So when Nashville also has a lot of renters, for an example.
And I want to pick back up in our final segment about just kind of those ties, those similarities between investment housing, both in New York and Tennessee. And I also want to talk about just some of the current work that you're doing here in Tennessee. And I encourage our viewers to tune into the final segment of Perspectives, where Melissa and I will be discussing the Tennessee Hispanic Action Network. For viewers just tuning in, I am host Alana McLaughlin. You are watching Perspectives. This morning on the show, I have Melissa Alvarez, founder of the Tennessee Hispanic Action Network, here to discuss her background, her education, the work that she has done across the country, and ultimately the work and impact that she seeks to have on Tennessee communities, and specifically Latino and Hispanic communities here in Tennessee. In our first two segments, we talked about Melissa's work, her social work throughout Florida, New York, Massachusetts, and we're talking about just some of the impact, some of the things that drive Melissa, some of the things that have shaped her, shaped the person that she is, kind of the advocate that she is. And ultimately, in this final segment, we are relating all of this work to what's going on in Tennessee today. We're talking specifically about the aftermath of the Antioch High School shooting. We're talking about its impact on local Hispanic communities. We're talking about growing fears of seeking support and seeking assistance after this shooting. We're ultimately just talking about ways that we as Tennesseans, as followers of Jesus Christ, can support support our brothers and sisters here in Tennessee. We're coming right back in, Melissa. I want to, again, we left off talking about obstacles.
Yeah.
And we left off talking about just some of the obstacles that Latino communities kind of face. And I want to wrap that up and kind of segue into your transition to Tennessee.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so there are obstacles. Again, we don't get the exposure of, we bear a lot of the brunt of all of the societal ills, but we don't get that exposure. Therefore, we don't always get the resources that we need. It's also harder to organize people that are afraid to participate.
You're right.
So we're going from Syracuse.
Yeah.
So in Syracuse, again, I went and I did an undergrad in social work, and I did a master's degree in social work because I wanted to be able, because I became my heart was community service. So I wanted to be able to provide the best services for my community. And I was told that would teach me everything that I would need to know. And it did, it really did. It was very helpful. Then we moved down to Nashville, and then I had another culture shock. So I had a culture shock when I left Florida because I had left this diverse, environment, and then I went right back to basically another bubble, working with just the Hispanic community. So then I came down here, and those resources did not feel as easily accessible. And so I started doing therapy, and I started practicing as a therapist, as a psychotherapist. And it was fine, and I liked it. But I realized, coming from this community background, I had specifically a patient that came in, and everything about this kid's problem was about, again, using a person and environment approach, was what was going on around the kid. But the kid was in therapy for his behavioral issues. And those behavioral issues were completely in line and made sense for what his reality looked like. And that's the thing, I can say that reality is not real because I don't experience it, but that's not true. Right. My reality is so real to me, and that kid's reality is so real to his, just like somebody else's reality is very real to them. So again, that social work perspective and trying to meet the kid where he's at, and I realized, I'm a community girl, and I wanted to get back to community work. And then, unfortunately, the Covenant School happened. And it was the first time in my life that I saw such an enormous turnout of people saying, we are done with gun violence. And I mean, I talk about it and it gives me chills to see that community come out, that community response. And it gave me this renewed sense of hope, right? We're gonna make change. And this is we're turning a new leaf. And so I tried to participate and help. And we used statistics, but we weren't including my community. And my experiences of growing up with so much gun violence as the norm wasn't included. And we weren't strategizing the way that I wanted to include for the Hispanic community. So I decided, well, it doesn't exist yet what I want to do, and there's a need. So I'm going to start an organization, and whoever wants to join, please do. We need all the allies that we can. So people ask me, well, I'm not Hispanic, or I don't speak Spanish, and we need everybody, all hands on deck, because not everybody feels comfortable coming out, whether they're undocumented or whether they have, they're a citizen or whatever. Some people don't necessarily feel comfortable coming out and being in the front of that. So we need people to come out and support and say, how can we help and what can we do? And that's the stuff that really helps us. But again, I think the way that I wanted to do it was a little bit different. I really wanted to incorporate strategy, and using my my education and my background, I learned about like civil rights leaders, right? And the framework that was laid for us rather than reinventing the wheel. And I met a woman who I just admire deeply, and her name is Clemmy Greenlee, and she's part of Mothers of a Murder. Admire her deeply, and she did the, she's been doing it for 20 years, right? So she and I became friends, and I listened to her feedback. When I would do something, she'd give me feedback, and it was wonderful. But then I said, you know what, we're working towards the same thing. She and I both focus on community. You know, this is what we're going to start doing from here on out. So I've sort of partnered with her organization. I cannot speak highly enough about her or her organization, and the work and the impact that they do as well. But again, these are the communities that are affected the most by gun violence, and what are we going to do to change it? So again, rather than reinventing the wheel, I'm going to use the tools that people have laid first, right? And try to work off of that. And what can we do to improve? So we strategize, and that's what we've been doing, you know? What can we do to improve? Well, there are a lot of things that we can do to improve. First off, it takes not just money, because money is a factor, but the most important thing over all money, and I'm not saying money is not important, we do need money, is getting that manpower. Right. So I started this organization. I had no idea. I knew there was a need, but I had no idea what that need, how big that was. So I started getting inundated with emails of people saying, can you help me with this? Can you help me with that? This happened to my parents. This happened to my sister. This happened to my... And then I couldn't keep up. So that's why anytime you ever see me, I'm always begging for help, because that need is so big, and so many people that see me feel comfortable with me, and they say, okay, she's Latina, I can feel comfortable, it's a safe place, this and this has affected us. And again, gun violence is it's like a more holistic approach you have to take to it. Right. It's like, we live in a community that has a lot of gun violence. What can we do? We can't afford to move. So that's like supportive services right there, right? Or we're undocumented. We don't have the ability to get a job. So those are the things that we need help with.
And Melissa, I want to spend this about last minute of this segment talking about ways that viewers and ways that community members can support you and the network. Kind of give me contact information, social medias, just any ways that people can connect.
Yes. Follow us on Instagram, Tennessee Hispanic Action Network. That's TN Hispanic Action Network on Instagram. Our website is TN Hispanic Action Network.
And you're Melissa Alvarez.
I'm Melissa Alvarez.
And I know your contact information is kind of at the bottom of a few different articles through the Tennessee, and that's how I found you. And I want to thank you for spending your time with me here this morning. I want to thank our Tennessee communities for taking a stand and fighting for those who cannot fight. Thank you and good morning.